So we can talk a little bit, actually, because it's an interesting story about where the idea of spin came from. And it was actually first proposed by two very young scientists at the time, George Uhlenbeck, shown here, and Samuel Goudsmit, who is here, and they're with a friend, and I can't remember who that is, but he did not have anything to do with discovering spin. And what you can see in this picture is that these are actually, they're pretty young guys in this picture. I think this is taken about 2 years after they discovered the fourth quantum number. So hopefully you can picture yourself at this age in a similar situation with an anonymous friend and think, you know, this is something, kind of observations maybe you could make as well. And what they were doing when they discovered that there must be this fourth quantum number is they were looking at the emission spectrum of sodium. And so specifically, they were looking at the frequencies. And if we think about the frequencies of sodium, it was already known at this time that you could calculate what those would be based on the difference in the energy levels. This happened in about 1925. So they actually knew exactly what they were expecting. So let's say they were expecting to see one certain frequency or one line in the spectrum at this point here. It turns out that what they actually observed, so this is the actual of what they saw, is if they were expecting their line at some given frequency, which I'll show by this dotted line here, what they actually saw was two lines. And one was just the teeniest, tiniest bit of a higher frequency than what was expected, and one was just below what they expected. And if we're talking about things in spectroscopy terms here, this is what we call a doublet. So it's centered at this frequency that was expected, but it's actually split into two different frequencies. And this was an amazing observation that they were made. They were totally surprised and excited, and they were thinking, how could this happen? Where did we get this split doublet from? And what they could come up with, what they reasoned, is that there must be some intrinsic property within the electron, because we know that this describes the complete energy of the orbital, should give us one single frequency. And that the fact that it's split into two was telling them that there must be some new property to the electron, and what we call that now is either being spin up or spin down. But at the time, they didn't have a well-formed name for it. They were just saying, okay, there's this fourth quantum number. There's this intrinsic property in the electron. So where the story gets kind of unfortunate, but also a little bit more interesting, is the fact that, well, they did publish what they observed, and they did write that up. They put it in a pretty low-impact paper. I think it was in French, so it wasn't really hitting all the scientific community of the time in any major way. And they didn't put their explanation of what they thought was going on. It just sort of was observing what they saw. These were very young scientists, of course, so what you would expect that they would do, which makes sense, is go to someone more established in their field, because they have this completely radical, revolutionary idea. Let's just run it by someone before we go ahead and publish this paper that makes this huge statement about this fourth quantum number. So the person they chose to talk to, and I think it was just Goudsmit that went to him and discussed it, is Wolfgang Pauli, which is shown here. So how many before 5 minutes ago had heard the name Goudsmit? All right, a couple. Okay, cool. How about Pauli, like the Pauli exclusion principle? Okay, so Pauli seems to be getting a little bit of fame that you'll see in a second here. So it turns out they go and they discuss their idea with Pauli. And what Pauli tells them is that this idea is ridiculous, that it's rubbish. If they go ahead and try to publish this, their scientific careers are ruined. They can pretty much pack it up and go home, because everyone's going to think they're ridiculous. No one will believe what they say, and it's a stupid idea anyway, is basically the gist of this conversation. And in chemistry, just like in any discipline, you have all types of scientists, but also all types of personalities. And unfortunately, Pauli had a personality that was known for, first of all, being very arrogant, but also the very unfortunate trait of taking other people's scientific ideas as his own. And as the story goes, as Goudsmit was leaving and the door was slamming, Wolfgang Pauli was already writing down this idea into a scientific paper of the idea of a fourth quantum number. And in fact, he did make some more strides. He was a brilliant thinker. Maybe he put it more articulately than those two younger scientists could have. But now it has come to light that they are the ones that do get credit for first really coming up with this idea of a spin quantum number. And it's interesting to think about how the politics work in different discoveries, as well as the discoveries themselves. themselves. You see that a lot with Nobel Prizes. There's usually a nice little scandal, nice little interesting story behind who else was responsible for the Nobel Prize-worthy discovery.